We are live? Are we live? Live, 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 live. Oh, crikey. It changes when I've got a white screen in front of me. How are we doing? Looking good? Sounding good? Eating all the requisite stuff we should? Says I have audio, which is good. This lighting really is shocking, isn't it? But what can I do about it? All looks good. Yeah, but good or dark good or light good, white good, good, not good, real good, good. Mighty good. Chips good. And you join me here in the garage. As you can see, garagey things in the background. We will get going here in a second. Have no face lamp. Yeah, but that's because I have no plug sockets. Because one's for the Ethernet cable and the other one's for my laptop charger. So once again, it involves multi-plugs. And we know how we're loving all the multi-plugs. They're all in vogue at the moment. Everybody needs more plug sockets. Ah. And it bounces around anyway. It's on auto white balance and auto exposure thingy. So it's going to go bright and dark and bright and dark and bright and dark. Just like that. I mean, the other way I could do it is just put something white on the screen. Like that. And then drag that over there. Just so we had something bright on my face. Apparently it's all kicking off in New York at a football game. But anywho, how are we this evening? I don't really know if I'm going to get into this. Much better. Where to start? Why to start? Who to start with? Ask the question. It always starts with a question. It's the best place to start. What is metaphysical? What is abandonment? Some people against a vaccine mandate started ripping up barricades and forcing their way into a stadium because the staff were trying to check for vaccines, or there was a player that wasn't allowed to play on the team because of a vaccine mandate thingy. Don't know. All I've seen is a little video of the goings on outside the stadium. So it's just the way it is. And now we've gone super bright. Arr. Fortunate. Anyway, you're here. Someone else is here. Who's here? Let me know who's here. Type your name. Send me a question. Bring the love. Because usually I'd just start waffling. But, you know. Waffling needs chicken. And maple syrup. And when it doesn't come along, it's very disappointing. Are we fans of sweet or savoury waffles? I don't know. Sweet and savoury at the same time. Oh. Like peachy cheese. Making two. Oh, fairy doodle. Yes. That would make sense. There you go, this is a back and forth. This is a one-way conversation that other people can listen to later. So I'm still waiting for the question. And no, not about little videos on Twitter. The question. The question. What is the question? Why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why are we in a garage? All of these questions. But mainly about the video title. As we were explaining earlier. And stuffs. What is the abandonment of the metaphysical? Well, to answer that, you need to establish what the metaphysical is. And that is everything that we can't witness, but we see the effect of it existing. There you go, that's the metaphysical. That which we can't see, but that we know acts. Or has an effect. And so the abandonment of it is saying that no, nothing that we can't see has any existence. And without a physical form of existence that you can witness, then it can't have any effect. Basically, in a small nutshell. And I hope I'm not being too loud, and I'm far away enough from people so that I can stream long into the night, if needs be. Ooh, that mini fridge could come in handy out here. I may have to use that at some point. And so, if we have the metaphysical, which is that which we can't bear witness to, but that which we know acts, because we see the effects of its existence, this would be called theism to some. Others it would be called, I don't know, emotions. But the higher plane emotions, not feelings. Feelings and emotions are different, I think. Are imagined things metaphysical? Yes. All thought is metaphysical. You can't see the physical machinations of thought in terms of what you recognize as thought. Dreams. You can't see what's in dreams, but they occur and have a profound effect on people. So the imagination, dreams, thought, emotions, all metaphysical things. And they're like, yeah, but they come from people and people are physical. And it's like, yes, but you can't see them. And yet you know that they are there because people act upon them. Fucking mosquito-y type thing. Because if they weren't there, you couldn't see the effects that they have on people. They wouldn't make people act. And this is where theism comes in. It is the first motivating principle. And we know that gods are metaphysical. You can imagine what they look like, you can create a picture of what they may look like, but you can't witness them in person. Which is why they are not beings, they are metaphysical forces at play. Even if they're just characterizations of nature's physical, mechanical goings on. And then people can be like, oh, but you can witness that, and you just whack a bloody great microscope near it. And then you poke it, and you see what happens. And then you can see it physically doing what it's doing, and what that does. And it's like, yes, we live in a physical world, and all things that happen all things that happen in motion need a physical thing to act upon something. But when it comes to the metaphysical, it is non-physical things that act upon things. And I would say that evolution is a product of a metaphysical interaction. One proof I think of that is sexual selection. Because as we see in certain animals, they have mating displays. And it's like, what motivates this mating display? And it's like, we know it's to attract a mate, but there must be an instinct to mate, to want to attract a mate. And as such, a product of the mind, something metaphysical, is producing an action. And so if we ignore that or abandon that or say that that doesn't exist, then what is doing it? And people can say, oh, it's the serotonin and the dopamine and the adrenaline and stuff. And it's like, as we keep saying, if that is a mechanism of biological beings, it must have started somewhere. So something must have created that. What created that? What implanted physically in the RNA and the DNA and the chromosomes, whatever you want to call it, what caused the information to be in there? Everybody's going to be like, oh, it's a product of mating. And it's like, no, because it was there before mating, if it drives the instinct to mate. It's like, what caused the first cell to replicate? Where did it get the ability? How did it know it had the ability, and what gave it the instinct to use that ability to do what it did? What was the motivating factor? That is the metaphysical. The whom, the who, the are, the what and the why. So you can't abandon that, because otherwise you can't explain motivation to do anything. And that's where the question of free will comes in. It's like, if something that can't consciously make a decision somehow interacted with something on a level that motivated another action, but it has no brain, it can't think, it doesn't contemplate, it just interacts, things just bump into it. And then it gets to the point, well, what if it does think? And then you go all the way down to what we commonly know as viruses. And it's like, how does this individual strand of RNA that has no other instruction apart from replicate, how does it acquire the protein to be able to transfer and lock onto a human receptor? How does it get into the body to be able to know where to go in the body to acquire the proteins that it needs to be expelled? Is that a unique quality of corona type viruses? The ones that have these protein shells? What about other viruses? Nobody talks about them. That's why we'll have to go and do some research. But yes, the metaphysical things. What motivates? And when something doesn't has the mechanism of contemplation and reasoning and rationality and logic, what motivates apart from instinct? And if instinct is driven by hormones, what told the DNA chromosomes of these organisms to pass that on? And what created it in the first place? These are the questions. And personally, I just can't see it. I can't see how a pool of random proteins magically join together into a specific sequence in which they join other proteins in another given specific sequence until they create something. A cell, a part of a cell, a spore, mitochondria. How does that happen just randomly? How long did these proteins exist in this environment before that happened? How many random events occurred until one little strand of RNA formed and then randomly, magically found another strand of RNA to form DNA that somehow created a structure to inhabit? Then when it inhabited that structure, luckily it knew how to utilize everything around it to create more of its structure and go from being one thing into two things, even in a single cell organism. You have the nuclei, the cytoplasm, and the wall. How did it know how to do that? Why did it do that? What brought things together in that specific order to create that? And then how did everything evolve out of that? Which is why I keep saying everything goes back to one. One. Everybody gets one. And it's like, what was the one? What motivated? It is the ultimate metaphysical question. And people abandon it. People abandon the question of what motivates. And as we've seen in human beings, what motivates is either mutual benefit, specifically between two people, that extends over many, or it is selfishness and what benefits one, and then what that benefit to the one is used for in conjunction with everything else. It's like, do we do unto others as we would have done unto thyself? Or do we reward thyself at the detriment of others, regardless? And that's where the other metaphysical forces that act upon people come from. Love, empathy, sympathy, hate, envy, wrath. They all stem from somewhere, they're all motivating. You can't see them, but you know they exist because they make you act. You feel their existence. Questions, questions, questions. I need some feedback. I've run out of waffle. What's going on? But it's like in animals as well. It's like, what exactly goes on apart from a trained response. Because we know that we can train animals, but then what comes from the untrained action of animals? So obviously something goes on in their head, they relate something to something. Well, what did you think of as being metaphysical? If it wasn't the things that we can't see producing an action, so we know they exist. The metaphysical plane, that which is beyond. Because I don't like the word cause when it comes to these arguments. I prefer the word motivation. Because motivation imparts motive and motion. Yes. Well, let's go all the way back to the beginning of the universe. How do I think the universe began? Well, I think one constant static vibration of everything that was possible to exist somehow met some random form of energy that caused it to either vibrate at a different rate or it met another vibration. And then when these two vibrations tried coexisting, or these two levels of energy tried coexisting, they couldn't coexist because they were out of phase and there was only two of them. And as such, a third vibration emerged. Because if there's no mind to make it happen, and there was nothing physical to make it happen, the only thing you can have is energy vibrating at a certain rate. And something either squeezed it, allowed it to expand, got in its way. It's passed through something. We don't know. But that's the best explanation I can come up with. Well, for things to exist, there needs to be two. And for those two to bring other things into existence, they need to be able to interact to create another one. And then that other one is the motivation for the other two to keep creating. Because otherwise it's like an argument. They just keep butting up against each other and they coexist, but they don't coexist in harmony. So it's just chaotic flow of two different energy forces. But I think that the energy qualities that we know exist and hold everything together in existence and make everything go out of existence must have always been in existence. So gravity, magnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear force. I believe they all existed. For them to exist, you need energy. of some sort that then coalesces into some sort of physical form in which it can act upon other things. And we know that everything vibrates. Even static solid objects have a vibration. They have a resonant frequency. Everything has a resonant frequency. There you go. And so all of space and time and matter at one point was at one resonant frequency. And then it resonated to a point where it shook itself apart into two different frequencies. And because these two different frequencies butted up against each other and weren't balanced, they created a third frequency. And then with these three frequencies then becoming in phase, the triphase, we then get everything that emanates from the triphase. Yes. Do I think what has not existed to be imagined must already exist metaphysically? Yes, to imagine it, you need to know that it's somehow possible. Even if what you are imagining technically can never be in existence, you have witnessed, felt, know about, have seen the act of something that makes whatever you're imagining possible. So either it's a thing being able to do a thing, so the thing must exist, or what it's doing must exist. And it's like you can say that a teapot grows legs, because you know that legs exist, you know a teapot exists. But you know that a solid static object like a teapot has no mechanism to be able to actually grow appendages. But you can imagine it. That's what I think. So yes, something metaphysical. Your imagination. The imagination itself is the metaphysical bit. And so what you know exists that can motivate something to act exists. Motivation exists. And so we know that forces exists. The forces of nature. How everything came into existence. The metaphysical. And so that everything that we can't see, that we know motivates an action, or acts upon something, because we see what happens when the thing acts, what impact it has. That is the metaphysical. Yes, and so I think all forces and energy existed in one field at one time. Because forces and energy, you can't see forces and energy. You can only see them acting on physical things. And so forces and energies are technically metaphysical. They exist, we can see they exist, we can measure what happens when their existence interacts with other objects. But you can't see them. You can't see raw energy. You can only see what physically comes out of raw energy. And you can't see force, you can only see what applies the force. The metaphysical. And this is where I'm trying to develop the points that I'm going to take into a debate, hopefully. Let me look up his YouTube. What's his name? Digital Gnosis? I think that's his name. Yes, Digital Gnosis. Let me just go to his channel. Copy. Paste-a-rooney. Because I contacted him, I expressed that I wanted to discuss the nature of metaphysical things and why I think that people who abandon them are getting it wrong on a perspective of the existence of things. So I dropped a comment on his video. He said that we'll arrange something at some point. Still waiting for that arrangement, but yes. Ask questions. I will not pose points. And the first question will be, can we assume that all of energy existed in a singular plane and existence at a certain frequency, and could something have interrupted it, changed it, squeezed it, expanded it? Because if everybody thinks that there was an ultimately dense singularity, that's one possibility. That's not what everybody thinks. That's just a proposal that has come up at some point. A black hole collapsed in on itself, and everything in that black hole became infinitely dense. And then when it squeezed too hard, it cracked itself, and all the energy came out in big balls of gas. And effectively, all things that can melt were in one big ball. And so that's what I think. If we have all of the gases in one place, and we have all of everything that can melt in one place, they come out of something that was infinitely hot. And to be infinitely hot, it must have melted infinite cold. And boom, everything. And so that's an explanation that I think could be semi-plausible. All of energy, and therefore all of force, met all of nothingness, and then the extreme amount of force on the nothingness forced everything into existence through the third force of coalescence. So you have existence, nothingness, and then coalescence. There you go. That's one way of framing it. Yep, infinite potential and the infinite end of potential, and when they both mixed, you got what came out of potential. You got everything that could potentially be. Aye, boom. Back in a few. I shall talk to myself then. So yeah, at some point in the future I may be having a conversation with Digital Gnosis about the nature of what is known as God or gods, metaphysical beings, and why some people think they exist and why some people think they don't exist. And whether they are just a human characterizing what they see act, but don't physically witness. Which is how I categorize the metaphysical. Or whether someone just had an imagination and wanted to come up with a story. Because we couldn't physically examine the causes of anything. So people were like, something outside of everything that exists must have created existence itself. It's one of the two. Otherwise known as God of the gaps. You know, when it can't be explained by science, say God did it. Or whether as people who write literature and have imaginations, it was just proposed one day. And because there was a gap that needed filling, you know, the why, the primary motivation, the unmoved mover, it was just a product of the imagination, and everybody felt it so strongly, and it was imagined by so many that it became the common theme. And as science has progressed, and we've investigated everything, people have veered away from it because, oh, the metaphysical doesn't exist because we know that things exist. And it's like, do we? These things that hold everything together. How do we know gravity exists? Because everything falls towards another mass. Okay. Well done. And we know that that other mass is moving because there's a space for something else to move towards. So there must be an emptiness. So something that occupied a space must move out of that space for something else to move into the space. That's gravity. The strong and weak nuclear force. No idea. Because that would be the rate of decay of everything that has a half-life that, you know, disappears and reinvents itself through ionic radiation degradation. And it's like, well, is that akin to electricity? Or is that ionic exchange in chemistry? What is that physical property? Because the other explanation for everything's existence is that it was one big ball of radiating stuff. Because we know that as something decays via radiation, it decays to the point where it's only got certain values as an atom. And so it becomes an element. And if elements exist as singular atoms, that they must have been shed from something that produced all of the energy that forms and collapses into the neutrons and protons and whatnot, and keeps them sticking together via their anatomical mass and their gravity, magnetism, strong and weak nuclear force on each other. Such and such. And it's like, but that's science. And it's like, yes, it's science. But because we know that force exists and energy exists, and that forces and energies can't be witnessed apart from the effect they produce on physical things. We know that there is a non-physical thing that we know exists that acts on physical things, otherwise known as God and all gods, when it acts upon things that live, plants and animals. And that's why we separate them from what we call Mother Nature, because we know that everything in nature is supposed to have come from water, and we know that moons or other bodies that can enact a gravitational effect on another body that has a gravitational effect the Luna. La Luna. It is feminine. Mother Nature. So I would say the gravitational bodies that acted upon anywhere that there was liquid, even if that liquid was molten things that aren't water. Or gases in a solid state at absolute zero that then became effervescent, that all emanated from one gas. The biggest gas. Has anybody run that experiment? Has anybody taken all available refinable gases and whacked them into one space and applied pressure to them to see if they would coalesce? So instead of freeze drying, you would freeze form. You would cool and add pressure. Could be an experiment. I'd like to see what happens with that. If you could take every gas and cool it to the point where it becomes either a liquid or a solid, depending on how close to absolute zero you need to get for the entropy to exist for all gases to become solids. And then if we could take everything that can melt and we were to melt it into one thing, and then we were to smash this molten block of whatever at ultimate hotness into the solid block of whatever that was at ultimate coldness. If everything that's in existence that could be in that state was reduced to that state, and you introduce those two states to each other, would they ultimately erupt into everything else? Would we get new things? Would we discover what was at the beginning that formed everything else that came out? Who knows? Questions. These are the things that I wonder. Because when you get thinking, you have to go from one place to an ultimate place. You have to start a destination and then eventually try and reach a destination. Where that destination is, how long it takes to get there, and what comes out in between, that's the ooh and the ah and the what and the where and the why and the who. And the wherewithal of everything. It troubles my mind. And she's Pakistan. And so the question is, do you want to go back and relive what came out in the middle while you were away? I had a little waffle. Waffly. You can watch it back sometime. Unless while you were away you thought of some magical question. about anything, either about metaphysics or the abandonment of them and what it's doing, if it's having an effect. If people ignore that the things that aren't physical can have an effect, they think that they don't have an effect. Yes. And then if the things that aren't physical that are having an effect are thought not to have an effect because they aren't physical, or that they can't have an effect because they aren't physical, then where are we? Because as the age-old question or statement comes, sorry, looking down, concentrating on two things at once, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. And as such, it ties all the way into good and evil, because they are forces. As is every categorization of things. Because as soon as you can categorize something, it becomes quantitative, and then it has qualities. And if we don't know, we have to guess at them. And if we are guessing at them and we don't know them, how are we to act appropriately? So we stop acting appropriately. And this is where the world goes to poop. And we don't want the world to go to poop. So we should recognize that things that we can't physically witness have a physical effect. Even if those things that we aren't physically witnessing are the internal machinations of how we set values and principles, and therefore our motivations to act, or what confines our actions. And then if we abandon them and we have no confinement on our actions, we have no self-limiting factor. And this is where people seem to want to go. There are those who think that you have self-responsibility and that you should limit your actions within a certain set of factors so that you don't cause detriment. And there are those who completely abandon that restriction upon themselves and want everything to be physically possible without consequence, apart from benefit to themselves. And this has been the back and forth and the interaction of the human state of being. Exactly where should we limit ourselves and where should we expand ourselves? Where should our ingenuity take us? And when we find out the effects of our ingenuity, when do we stop? Where's the breaking point? And I have a theory about miracles, if you want to hear that. Do you want to hear the theory of miracles? What is miraculous? Miraculous? what the world would be like if people's creativity and imagination were developed further. Well, this comes back to the imagination. And for us to be able to imagine it, we need to know that the mechanism can exist for something physical to do something that previously didn't exist. You have to create something out of technically nothing, apart from pure energy and force. Don't know whether that was a spider or a mosquito, one of the two. For people's creativity and imagination to be developed further, we would need to witness something act to know that it's possible. And we would need to know the physical qualities of everything to be able to know that what can act can change things into other things to make other stuff happen. And so what would the world be like? Infinite ingenuity, infinite potential. And the left and the right brain thing, the what exists and the what to do with it. You would need to know all that exists to know all you can do with it. Instead of houses being built in the lots for people to buy, a man building his home and it being personalised entirely, lots of individually crafted homes. Well, that could be possible. Instead of having one developer build lots of houses to be able to sell it on, everybody owned their own bit of land, everybody built their own house on it. That could be possible. That is possible. And the only way you can develop that further is by knowing everything that you can turn into a building material that could plausibly build a solid structure that would maintain the weather resistance for you to live in it comfortably. And that's why it's evolved over time. People used what they had and their imagination and their knowledge of the properties of what was and the forces that could be applied to it. Hemp. I haven't investigated hemp far enough to know what it could be used for. And I think you'd have to combine it or use it in conjunction with something else to make it weatherproof enough. Is it strong enough? Well, if you can build a house out of cardboard, and you can build a house out of cardboard and cloth. So if you could make something cardboard-like that's stiff enough and strong enough, like plasterboard, for instance, if you could make something out of hemp that would replicate that, and then you could make a hydrophobic fabric out of hemp, and you could make it tightly woven enough to not let the wind in, and you could make it reflective enough so that the sun doesn't damage it, and you could make it breathable enough so that it doesn't retain moisture and it doesn't rot. I think you'd have to mix it with something else, but yes, hemp technically could be used as a building material. It's just whether you could make it dense enough and tight enough to last. Technically, you can build a building out of anything that's solid enough and wind resistant enough to stay up. I mean, they build things out of ice. So anything that isn't liquid, anything that forms a solid. And then it's just a matter of whether it can stand up to nature. Sunlight, wind, water, fire, biological organisms that may want to eat it, etc. I think that would be the main problem with hemp. There would be some sort of bacteria or fungi that would want to live on it, that would eat away at it, sort of thing. Some mushrooms, fascinating fungi. I would recommend watching that, as I think you already have, because I recommended it. Theory on miracles. Well, miracles. Miracles are what physically can't happen happening. And so there must be a physical property of stuff and a force or energy that you can apply to it for things to appear miraculous. And it's just that you don't know that that force exists or that material property exists yet. And so it comes across as miraculous because you didn't know it could happen, and yet it has happened. And so miracles could be the product of just someone knowing something that you don't. Like every first is technically a miracle. That's my theory. Every first is a miracle. And so when we call things miraculous, it's because someone didn't know about the physical properties or the forces you could apply to it to make it do something. And then someone works it out, makes it happen, and that's a miracle. And then you get things that technically can't happen happening. And so how do you explain what has happened? Well, you can investigate the properties of it, as science does, and try and work it out that way. Or you can say something had the ability to change itself and act upon itself, or act upon other things through that change. There's my theory. What was called miraculous was just a stroke of genius, so to speak, if you want to add words to it. Because, you know, perceptions in context create concepts that you then morally just come to a revelation to build a principle to act upon. And because all of that is the metaphysics of the physical, if you reduce that to a single thing, God. So it all ties in. Every theory lines up. And the fact that that emanated from a first out of a physical property we didn't know exists, from a force that we didn't know exists, or that we can't witness, a metaphysical thing with the power to do it, created it. It's just a concept. It's a way of conceptualizing what brought things into existence, and how the machinations of the mind used what was in existence to create other things. And then how we borrowed those designs that emanated from nature, and how we adapted them to use them on other physical things. The first miracle, existence itself, from something metaphysical. Because we witnessed the production of its acts, and yet we couldn't witness exactly what was acting. So you had two things, existence and imagination. Infinite potential, pure energy and force. And voila. So there's a little thing. Just writing thoughts down. I shall refer back to them tomorrow and write things, because I like writing things when I have a thought. Get it down in a linear fashion, so that I can know that a principle emanated linear thought, and that each segment of that linear thought makes sense in order, and then comes to a point where it can reach an end point that refers back to the principle. And that's how we know it's true. When you have an emanation, a linear sequence of events, and then a circular pattern of logic. Things that are circular don't make sense, they're self-defeating. It's like, no, they're self-affirming. Can be self-affirming, or self-defeating. But to be self-defeating, something along the sequence of events has to be out of order and doesn't make sense in that order. Because it either can't emanate from the principle, or it can't emanate from what came before it. And therefore it disrupts it, and you can't get back to the circular. And I've expressed this all before. Do. So something out of this conversation made something out of a previous conversation make more sense, or could make more sense. You know, go back, watch it, refer to it. Judge, review, compare. See if it all makes sense. Because it makes sense to me, that's how I got here. That's how I am the way that I am. It's how my mind works. And stuff. Synchronicities. Well, things must synchronize in order for their existence to be possible. So yes, you could characterize synchronicities as in two random events that you didn't think were going to occur suddenly occur in a paradoxical and parallel but somehow synchronized version of events that then produces something. And the fact that they line up so perfectly to something can emanate out of them, come into creation. Be. It is being instead of doing. And this is what I mean. When you abandon the metaphysical, things are doing, they are not being. And they have to be able to do. And so you can say that there are all these doings coming along, but to do, they need to be. So with the being and the doing comes the things. And out of the things, the beings do, and things become more things. You know, and other waffle. The other thing I was going to talk about, what was I going to talk about? The very long conversation that I saved, because it seemed to be a good line of thought at the time. It would take me a long time to go back and read through it and come up with stuff. So that may have to be another thing on its own. Get a cranky back sitting on this massage thing. I'll have to abandon it. Or move it for the next time I do this. What did I talk about? So you said there was a thing, and you went looking for the thing And you found the thing and you said that I've already said about the thing, but I don't know what the thing is, so I don't know whether I have. Ah, fair enough. When did I mention that I was going to talk about that? Was that in the long convo? See, I don't remember these things. Because things. A few days ago. Well, days ago. Random conversation from days ago. Can't remember these things. Oh, that's a white screen, isn't it? Anywho. So, unless you have questions or imaginations or topics or pokey pokey or anything related to something that we can't witness that obviously is a force and acts because something emanates from it, you know, let me know. Otherwise, I will bid thee adieu. And obviously comment afterwards. Like. If you're watching this on repeat, subscribe if you like the topics of conversation and where it's going. Click the alert bell so that you know when I go live. Look in the description for my Twitter handle if you want to join me there. If anybody thinks that this has been super wonderful and has any pennies to spare, there is a Streamlabs link and I will be very grateful. If you would donate to the cause, that is better thinking. Yay. Right. We shall end it there. Everybody have a fun evening. Thank you for listening.